Protocol Taurus by Andrew Harwood. First published in 2026 by the Thompson-Newman Files Limited. Copyright 2026. All rights reserved. Every fortune begins as a set of rules somebody wrote down. Every catastrophe is the clause they left out. The rain over the city wasn't falling so much as auditing. Methodical, line by line, missing nothing. It worked its way down the glass of the NewCap building the way bad news works through a portfolio. Drew Newman had buried his parents in 2017. As an only child, he had inherited everything. Probate was a strange word for it. 8 months of lawyers and documents to establish what everyone already knew. That Elizabeth Newman had built NewCap Ventures from a rented room and a reputation. That she had never let her holdings slip below 75%. And that everything she had built now belonged to a son, who had spent those years learning a very different trade. The board had sent flowers to the funeral. Then they had sent a proposal, beautifully drafted, suggesting Drew's shares be placed into a discretionary trust, professionally managed, of course, to spare him the burden during a difficult time. Drew had read it twice, noted who had signed it, and declined in one sentence. He promoted Charles Fairfax to chairman and managing partner, and together with the partners, they would run NewCap Ventures under delegated authority in Drew's absence. But Drew would remain the anchor capital partner and in full control of his inherited holding. The partners agreed, and Drew had returned to his next deployment, alone and wrapped in grief. 2 years later, he was back. Drew had left the SBS after the failure of Operation White Knight. He had a clear 2-part mission. Part 1, to build something better with Mike Harrington, Clara and Razz out of a decrepit warehouse in East London. Part 2, to protect his mother's legacy by assuming his position at NewCap Ventures. He sat at the long obsidian table in Boardroom A, in the seat nearest the door, and listened to Charles Fairfax chair a meeting with great flourish and no actual attention. Portfolio's in a strong position, Fairfax was saying, tapping his Mont Blanc against the agenda in a slow, leisurely rhythm. No red flags. 1 or 2 positions need patience. Venture is a patient discipline, Drew. Your mother understood that better than anyone. It isn't, the pen paused delicately, a battlefield. No, Drew agreed. On a battlefield, you know where the enemy is. Somewhere down the table, someone converted a laugh into a cough. Drew didn't look to see who. He already knew. Imogen Tran, the youngest partner in the room, sat 3 seats down with her notes squared and the very still face of a person who has learned exactly how much of her intelligence a room can forgive. Drew turned a page in the board pack. He had read all 132 portfolio files in 11 days, cover to cover, in his mother's office, her handwriting climbing the margins of the older ones. He read the way he had been taught to patrol, completely, or not at all. Investment 79, he said, Hearth and Wild. The temperature of the room changed by a degree or 2. Nothing anyone could point to. Fairfax's pen resumed its rhythm a fraction too quickly. Premium fresh food business down in Essex, Fairfax said. Ready meals, farm shops, that sort of thing. Strong brand. Founders are marvellous salesmen. I'm sure revenue's grown 40% year on year. Drew looked up. So why have we written our 3 million down to 1? Consumer's a difficult space at the moment. Growing 40% a year. 31 staff. A 10,000 square foot production unit running double shifts. Drew laid the page flat. And no management accounts filed with us for 2 consecutive quarters, in breach of our own information covenants. The auditors resigned in July. Nobody minuted why. The silence had texture now. Down the table, a man in his early 30s with a rugby player's shoulders and a careful haircut had gone very still. Martin Sinclair, the deal lead, whose name was on the original investment paper and whose face currently belonged to a man watching a slow-motion car crash from the passenger seat. "These things are usually a bookkeeping muddle," Fairfax said smoothly. "Growing companies, stretched founders. We were minded to be patient, take the write-down quietly, and spare everyone the embarrassment of—" "Whose embarrassment?" Drew asked. Fairfax's pen stopped altogether. "It's my mother's money," Drew said, without heat. Somehow the absence of heat made it worse. It doesn't get written off quietly to spare anyone anything. He gathered his papers and stood. "Investment 79 stays open. I'll take it myself." Sinclair knocked on the door of Elizabeth's office. Drew's now, though he still hadn't moved her photographs, 40 minutes later, which told Drew most of what he needed to know. Guilty men waited to be summoned. Frightened men came early. "Sit down, Martin." Sinclair sat. Up close he had the build of a man who'd played in the back row and the posture of one who still trained. "Before you ask, yes, it's my deal, my name's on it. And no, I'm not going to pretend it isn't a mess." Drew studied him. "You were RMR. A blink. How did you—" "You fell in beside the chair instead of behind it, and there's a globe and laurel in your gym bag by the coat stand." Drew almost smiled. "Which unit?" "RMR London. Weekend Warrior, they used to call us." A shrug. "Got the green beret, then discovered I was better with a spreadsheet than a rifle." "Nothing weekend about the green beret," Drew said, and something in Sinclair's shoulders came down half an inch. "Talk me through it, from the beginning. Leave nothing out." Sinclair talked, Hearth and Wild, founded 5 years ago by Ben Calder and Oliver Kessler. Calder was the brand. Charming, plausible, the kind of man who could sell a fridge to a Norwegian and make him feel he'd won the negotiation. Kessler ran operations, if running was the word. Big, volatile, a dropped assault charge in his past, a talent for making problems disappear by standing very close to them. The product was excellent. The staff were excellent. The numbers had been excellent, right up until they'd stopped arriving. NewCap put in $3 million for 30%, Sinclair said. Founders kept 70%. I wanted proper covenants, information rights with teeth, board observer, consent matters. I was told—" He stopped. "You were told the deal was hot, the founders were marvellous, and heavy paper would frighten them off," Drew said. "By the chair?" Sinclair looked at his hands. "It was my name on the recommendation. I signed it, but I flagged the covenant package as inadequate before completion, and I've flagged the reporting breaches twice since. It's all minuted." He met Drew's eyes. "I want you to know, I wrote it down. Not because I'm covering myself, because writing it down was the only weapon I had." "When did you last visit the unit?" 6 weeks ago, unannounced." Sinclair's jaw worked. "Kessler walked me off the premises, physically, hand on my chest, into the car park. He told me the next auditor who turned up uninvited would leave in an ambulance, and then he smiled and asked after my wife by name. He said it evenly, but his hands had made fists without consulting him. I reported it. I was advised not to escalate. The phrase used was, 'commercially sensitive relationship.'" Drew sat back. Through the window behind him, the rain kept auditing London. "There's one more thing you should see," Sinclair said. "Or rather, someone else found it. It wasn't mine to bring you." The someone was already waiting outside the door, notes squared against her folder. Sinclair stood and opened the office door. Imogen Tran came in, sat where Drew gestured, and laid out 4 sheets of paper, as if she were dealing a hand she'd been holding for months. I do a reconciliation, she said. My own. Every portfolio company, public data only. Your mother taught me. She said the numbers a company sends you are its opinion of itself. The numbers it leaves lying around in public are its character. She slid the first sheet across. Hearth and Wild has stopped paying its suppliers. 2 county court proceedings have been filed in the last month. A charge registered against the production equipment that matches no facility we know about. And in March, a company called Calder Court Stationery was incorporated. Sole director, Ben Calder's mother. It has invoiced Hearth and Wild 11 times. She paused. Their staff make the best fresh food in the southeast, and I don't believe they've bought stationery from anyone's mother 11 times. Drew read all 4 sheets. Twice. Then he looked at the 2 people his mother's firm had been ignoring and asked the only question that mattered. How long before it goes down? They'll miss payroll inside a month, Tran said. 31 people. Drew nodded slowly. He thought of margins, not the financial kind, the kind in his mother's files, her small fierce handwriting beside a founder's glowing forecast. Character first, structure always. Then we'd better be quick, he said. By strange coincidence, Ben Calder asked for the meeting himself, which saved everyone the trouble of pretending it wasn't an emergency. He arrived at NewCap in a very good suit and a cloud of confidence with nothing behind it, like cologne. Kessler came too, filling his chair the way weather fills a forecast, and spent the first 10 minutes looking at Drew the way big men look at other big men, cataloguing. It's a bridge, that's all, Calder said, hands wide, warm as a heat lamp. 1.5 million sees us through to the spring listings. The brand's flying. Waitrose are circling. Your mother, God rest her, a wonderful woman, she understood us. She always said the numbers would catch up with the story. No, Drew said. She never said that. The heat lamp flickered. But you'll get your 1.5, Drew went on. Here are the terms. Each of you transfers 22.5 percentage points of the company to NewCap for £1 per share. You sign the stock transfer forms and shareholder resolutions when the facility completes. NewCap goes from 30 to 75%. We amend the articles and board rights accordingly. We take a debenture, a first charge over every asset the company owns, including the ones parked outside your unit. I join the board. We take control of the bank mandate. Your system's open to my finance team by Friday. Every ledger, every login. And a forensic review starts immediately. Whose findings go, where findings go. The room was quiet enough to hear Kessler's chair complain as he leaned forward. That's robbery, Calder said. No, Drew said mildly, but I have a feeling we'll get to what robbery is. And if we tell you where to put your terms, Kessler's voice was low, pleasant, awful. Then you miss payroll on the 28th. The company folds inside 3 weeks, and 31 people who did nothing wrong spend Christmas at a food bank. An insolvency practitioner sells your brand to the highest bidder, investigates both of you, traces company money into your personal assets, and reports your conduct to the insolvency service. If the evidence supports it, they seek your disqualification and refer the matter for criminal investigation. Drew slid the term sheet across the table. You built something good, gentlemen. That's the tragedy of it. The paperwork will be ready by close of business today. Sign by Friday. They signed on Thursday, reluctantly, theatrically, Calder making a small speech about partnership and new chapters. Kessler signed without a word, and on the way out he stopped beside Drew's chair, close enough that it meant something. Men who go through other men's drawers, he said softly, sometimes find their fingers broken. Duly noted, Drew said calmly, without looking up. Good day, Mr. Kessler. He turned the page he was reading. 6 days later, Tran forwarded him a photograph from a contact who drank coffee near the Hearth and Wild unit. A brand new Aston Martin DB11 Storm Black, parked across 2 spaces by the loading bay. The system's access never came. The server had failed. The bookkeeper was on holiday. Location unknown. Return date flexible. The passwords had been changed for security reasons by persons unspecified. Drew looked at the photograph of the Aston for a while. He had nothing against Aston Martins. He owned 2. He had inherited one from his father and had paid for the other himself. Then he picked up his phone and drove east. In the week since the 4 of them had stood in the empty warehouse off Factory Road and decided to build something better, the desks had multiplied faster than the answers. The warehouse was still mostly empty. A cluster of desks, a kettle, a whiteboard, and the vast patient dark of a building waiting to be told what it was going to be. Drew wasn't ready to say the name of that out loud. Not even here. But it had a kettle and a toaster. Some operations begin with a plan. The good ones begin with a brew. Let me make sure I have this right. Mike Harrington handed out mugs and prized the lid off a tin-marked baking soda, in which Eleanor's shortbread sat in grease-proof paper like contraband. 2 founders. One's a con man, one's a thug. They've taken a company that actually works and they're strip mining it for sports cars. He bit a shortbread in half. And these are the civilians we're dealing with now. I thought the whole point of leaving was fewer terrible people. Better class of terrible, said Razz, who had arrived overdressed and parked the Bentley at an angle that suggested it was embarrassed by the postcode. Venture capital, mate. All the treachery of Whitehall with none of the catering. Clara Mills sat at the desks with Tran's 4 sheets and 16 of her own, building the picture the way she built everything. Quietly, completely, edges first. Your Miss Tran is good, she said. Proper work. I've added movement mapping. Terry's had them for 5 days. Terry was ex-Met. 30 years of following people who deserved it, gleefully unretiring at day rates. Calder does the gym, the Shoreditch flat, lunch on Dean Street. Kessler is the interesting one. Gym at 6, unit by 8, and twice this week, the Aston dealership in Chelmsford. Twice, Mike said. He's already got one. Yes, said Clara. Interesting, isn't it? The lawyer arrived at noon. Miriam Shaw, commercial litigator, silver-bobbed and completely unhurried, the kind of lawyer other lawyers settled with. She read the file cover to cover, made 7 notes, and delivered her verdict over the 2nd pot of tea. You can do all of it. The amended articles and facility documents give NewCap step-in rights, she said. The reporting breaches and failed systems access constitute an event of default, crystallized, I'd say, 3 times over. As majority shareholder, NewCap can take operational control and require both founders to step aside from management pending investigation. You, as its representative and a director of Hearth and Wild, can secure the premises. She looked up over her glasses. My conditions. Everything in daylight. Everything witnessed. Every step papered before you take it, not after. You are not storming a compound, Drew. You are executing a document. It just happens to be a document with boots on. And the staff? Drew asked. It had been his first question in every planning session, and everyone in the room had noticed. Payroll's due Friday, Clara said. So we go Thursday. NewCap funds the wages if need be. First thing the staff hear is that they're being paid. 3 of the staff are family. Calder's sister in the office, Kessler's nephew and sister-in-law in the factory shop. Assume they'll be on the phone to the boys within 90 seconds. Then we won't need 90 seconds, Drew said. Mike? 2 friends of mine will be there. Quiet lads. You've met the sort. Mike's face was carefully neutral. Given Mr. Kessler's ambulance remark, I'd call it proportionate. They'll stand at the back and be available. And I, announced Razz, have procured 2 Range Rovers with blacked-out windows because if we are doing corporate theatre, we are doing it properly. Also, clipboards, lanyards, and a flask of proper coffee for Terry, who has earned it. He beamed. Morale and snacks. Drew stood at the whiteboard, legal steps down one side in Shaw's handwriting, timings down the other in Clara's. Between the 2 columns sat the thing he hadn't written down. That the paperwork his mother's firm had signed was so thin. The only remedy left was a car park full of Range Rovers. Tea before tactics, Mike said quietly at his shoulder. You all right, Bootneck? Thinking about clauses, Drew said. Course you are. Normal people think about beaches. Thursday came in cold and low, the sky the colour of wet cement, frost claiming the supermarket car park in Romford, a patch at a time like a slow occupation. 2 Range Rovers, 1 silver saloon containing Miriam Shaw, and a box of documents with tabs in 3 colours. It was 7:40. Drew stood by the lead car, wearing black, tailored, deliberate, sleeves precisely set. Not a suit. Suits were for meetings. This was an execution of documents. The phone buzzed. Terry. Morning. You'll enjoy this, Terry said. They're not headed to the unit. Both of them, Calder driving. They've just walked into the Aston dealership in Chelmsford. A pause, the sound of a man leaning forward in a parked car. They're looking at a Vantage. Trade plates are out. I think they're buying the second one now. Drew stood very still for a moment. Behind him, Mike leaned out of the Range Rover's window. Well? They're at the dealership, Drew said, buying another Aston. There was a silence in the car park of a kind rarely achieved outside churches. You are joking, Mike said. We go now, Drew said. Everyone, now. The convoy pulled out with the calm, unhurried menace of vehicles that know exactly where they're going. The Hearth and Wild unit stood in a row of tired industrial sheds, roller doors up, the morning shift moving trays through clouds of their own breath. The Range Rovers came through the gates at walking pace and stopped in a line that owned the yard by simple geometry, and afterwards nobody could quite agree who had opened the doors first. Only that men and women with clipboards and lanyards were suddenly everywhere at once, polite, unhurried, and impossible to be anywhere except in front of. Drew walked into the middle of the production floor, and it said something about certain kinds of men that the machine seemed to quieten before anyone touched a switch. Good morning. My name is Drew Newman. I'm a director of this company, and I represent its majority shareholder. He held up a single sheet of paper. Trading is suspended for today, while my colleagues secure the company's records. Nobody here is in any trouble. No redundancies are planned. Your wages will be paid tomorrow, in full, by us. That's the first thing I wanted you to know. He looked around the floor, at the hairnets and the wary, tired, capable faces. You've been doing excellent work for people who didn't deserve it. That part changes today. Stay where you are, have a brew, and my colleague Clara will speak to each of you in turn. In the corner, exactly on Clara's schedule, Calder's sister already had her phone to her ear. They came back fast. Drew had to give them that. 38 minutes later, the DB-11 slewed into the yard, and the 2 founders of Hearth and Wild came out of it like the weather. Calder had gone the grey of old snow, heading for Shaw and the paperwork, with his hands already conducting an imaginary orchestra of objections. Kessler didn't bother with the paperwork. He came straight across the yard at Drew, big and fast and certain, and Drew, who had spent his whole adult life being taught exactly how much trouble was coming and precisely when, did the hardest thing he knew, which was nothing at all. Witnesses? Daylight? Paper? Kessler swung. There was a blur at the edge of Drew's vision, a sound like a wardrobe falling downstairs, and then Oliver Kessler was face down on his own concrete with his arm locked at an angle nature had strong opinions about, and Mike Harrington was kneeling on him with the settled, patient weight of consequence itself. "Morning," Mike said. "Lovely car." "You are suspended as a director and employee of this company, pending investigation of financial irregularities," Miriam Shaw said, arriving at an unhurried walk and laying the letter on the ground 8 inches from Kessler's face. "And that concludes the violent portion of today's programme. Mr. Calder, your copy. I'd read Clause 4 before threatening anyone with your own lawyers. You'll find they're conflicted out." By 11 the servers were secured. The server had not, it turned out, failed. Someone had switched it off and hidden the drives in the ceiling void, a fact Razz established in under 10 minutes and took personally. "The ceiling," he kept saying, cabling the machine back to life. "Amateurs, you hide drives in the walls." By noon the locks were changed, the bank mandate was under Drew's control, and 31 people were drinking tea among the trays. 3 resigned by text that afternoon. Nobody chased them. Outside, the frost gave it up and let go of the yard. Inside, something warmer had already taken hold. The forensic team took 6 weeks, and what they found was depressingly unoriginal, because theft always is. £940,000 over 2.5 years. The cars, a pleasure yacht in Brightlingsea worth £250,000, the deposit on the Shoreditch flat. Watches, receipts for luxury holidays, 11 invoices from Calder Court Stationery for stationery that had at no point existed. All of it dressed as directors' loans, marketing, or that hardest working line in fraudulent accounts, miscellaneous consultancy. The Astons went first. Company assets, bought with company money, the debenture did the rest. Drew made a point of being at the unit the morning the low-loader came for the DB11, not for his own satisfaction, although he would have admitted to a certain quiet contentment, but because the staff had earned the sight of it. The packing floor watched it go up the ramp in silence, and then someone at the back started applauding, and then the whole shed did. Marta Fonseca, who had run the production floor in everything but title for 3 years while the men out front bought watches, was given the title, the pay, and the authority the same week. Her first act as operations manager was to fix a fault in the chiller line that had been on order for 8 months. It cost £60. 6 months after the morning in the yard, Hearth and Wild posted its first profitable quarter. Within a year, the write-down was reversed in full. 3 years later, though that is another story, it sold to a family food group for more money than Calder had ever dreamt of stealing, and every member of staff shared in it, because by then the paperwork said they had to. Drew wrote that clause too. Calder pleaded guilty, wept in court, and went to prison still visibly confused that Charm had a jurisdiction. Kessler ran to Florida on the theory that the Atlantic was wider than an arrest warrant. 14 months later, 2 US Marshals knocked on a door in Tampa, and he came home to a longer sentence than his partners, having added flight to the charge sheet, which was, everyone agreed, extremely Kessler. Martin Sinclair was formally cleared, his minuted warnings quoted at length in a report that made bruising reading for the corner office. Drew promoted him the same week. Director of Strategic Investments, with standing authority to walk into any portfolio company unannounced. "Why?" Sinclair asked when Drew told him. "My name was on that deal. You'd have been within your rights to—" "You wrote it down," Drew said, "when writing it down could cost you. That's the whole job. Everything else is spreadsheets." Sinclair was quiet for a moment. "I owe you," he said. "You owe the firm your judgment," Drew said. "Nothing else. I mean that, Martin. If the day ever comes when I'm the one who's wrong, write it down." He would have cause, years later, to remember us saying it. Miriam Shaw came to Newman House on a Sunday because Drew had asked her to, and because Holly's roast justified the M40. Afterwards, they worked at the long table in the library with the fire ticking, and what they drafted between the lamb and midnight went into every NewCap shareholders' agreement from that January onward, and stayed there. It was, on its face, dry. 4 clauses and a schedule. Shaw called the package the emergency provisions. What it actually amounted to was the morning in the yard, rewritten so that it never had to happen in a car park again. The problem, Drew had explained, was arithmetic. Kessler and Calder held 70%. If they hadn't needed our bridge, they could have looted that company to the floor, and no vote we called could ever have touched them. We got in because they ran out of money, before they ran out of nerve. That's not a protection. That's luck. So the clause turned the arithmetic on its head. It sat dormant in every agreement, invisible, undiscussed, waiting. Shaw divided the mechanism into 2 parts. The clause was the weapon, dormant in the shareholders' agreement until independently certified evidence woke it. Prime was the discipline around it, NewCap's confidential assessment file, evidential rules and internal board process. Prime determined whether anyone was permitted to reach for the weapon at all. It could investigate, it could preserve evidence, it could recommend full activation. It could not suspend, silence, or seize, not by itself. The clause woke only on certification, jointly signed by an independent forensic accountant and independent counsel, neither chosen by the investor alone, that there were reasonable grounds to suspect a founder, or controlling principal, of fraud, of acting against the company, or of being compromised by money, threat, or any hand reaching in from outside. Upon certification, and for one resolution only, the founder's shares went silent. Suspension and the appointment of a custodian then required 3/4 of the equity that remained, so no single investor could swing it alone, and no founder could hide behind his own majority. Absolute information rights for the custodian. A sunset, the intervention lapsed in 90 days unless independently renewed, and teeth pointing backwards too. Trigger it wrongly, on thin evidence or bad faith, and the founder's compensation came out of the investors who had reached for it. It cuts both ways by design, Shaw said, reading the final draft. You've made it almost as dangerous to invoke as to deserve. Most of my clients would want that edge blunted. The edge is the point, Drew said. It should frighten everyone equally. Fairfax fought it at the January board, of course, with the special energy of a man who has recently survived a bruising report. No founder in London will sign this siege engine. We'll be laughed out of every deal in the city. Every founder who intends to behave will sign it in 10 seconds, Drew said. It costs an honest man nothing. It only frightens the ones who plan to become someone else once our money's in the bank. He looked down the obsidian table pleasantly. Which is it costing you, Charles? Tran seconded the motion. The vote carried. She caught Drew afterwards by the lifts. Your mother hired me when nobody else in this postcode would return my calls, she said. She'd have liked this clause. She'd have pretended not to. She'd have called it inelegant, and then she'd have used it twice by Easter. It was the first time Drew had heard anyone at NewCap talk about Elizabeth as a person rather than a portrait, and he found he had to look at the lift doors for a moment. Thank you, Imogen, for the reconciliation. You saw it first. I just read what was lying around in public, she shrugged. Numbers are opinions. Character leaks. The whole affair makes Fairfax's position as managing partner untenable, Drew said. He may keep the chair until the governance review is complete. He will not keep both offices. Imogen studied him. Who becomes managing partner? You do, subject to the necessary approvals, which, given that I hold 75%, should not detain us long. Drew stepped into the lift. The doors closed on Imogen before the meaning of it had fully reached her. It got its name the same week, in the warehouse, late. The desks had multiplied. The whiteboard had things on it now that Drew rubbed off whenever anyone new came near, because the thing the warehouse was going to be finally had a shape, if not yet a business name, he was willing to say. Razz had, over everyone's objections, acquired a second kettle. Load balancing, mate. And Clara sat on a desk with a mug, reading Shaw's final draft with a navigator's eye. Emergency provisions, she said. Schedule 6, you can't call it that. Clauses with names get respected. Clauses with numbers get negotiated. Go on then, Mike said. Name the beast. Clara looked up, not at Mike, but through the high skylight, where a rare hard frost sky had scoured London clean enough to show actual stars. She'd navigated by them once, in another life. There's Orion, she said, and then, with the smallest smile, to Drew. Your old call sign. You know what Orion's facing, don't you? What he's been holding off since before anyone wrote anything down. Drew followed her gaze. Above the rooflines of Docklands, the hunter stood side-on to the winter sky, shield up, forever a stride away from the bull coming down at him, Taurus, head lowered, red eye burning. Never quite arriving. Held. Not killed. Held. That's the job, Clara said quietly. You don't slay it. You hold it. Forever, if you have to. Protocol Taurus, Drew said, trying it. Around the warehouse, nobody laughed. Protocol Taurus, said Razz, raising his mug. To the bull. May we never meet him. They drank to it, in tea, in a warehouse in Docklands, under the only clear sky that winter. 4 people, 2 kettles, a toaster, and a clause. It went into the January agreements without fanfare, and into every portfolio agreement after that. By separate amendment, it went into NewCap's own constitutional and governance documents too. Founders signed it, as Drew had said they would, in 10 seconds. A few asked what it meant, and Sinclair developed a standard answer. It's a smoke alarm. If you're not planning a fire, you'll never hear from it. In time, the firm stopped explaining it at all. In more time, a newer generation would find it in the precedents, note that it had never once been triggered, and quietly shelve it, filed, dormant, waiting, the way protocols wait. Because a protocol has no memory. It does not know whose hand drafted it, whose mother's firm it was written to guard, or who taught it that the bull must be held rather than killed. It does not remember that it was written out of love, in a house in Buckinghamshire, by a grieving son with a lawyer and the remains of a Sunday roast. It knows only its trigger conditions. It would wait years without complaint, and when at last a divided board in a glass tower reached for it, some frightened, some ambitious, and one of them knowing exactly where to place the knife, it would not pause to ask whether the founder it was pointed at was hostile or compromised, or the man who wrote it. In the warehouse, the kettle clicked. It sounded like order. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. I'm building a thriller universe called the Thompson-Newman Files, and there are many more stories still to come. Until next time, remember, tea before tactics.